Story 1. I've actually got two stories that go together, and they both happened back when I worked nights at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. My name's David. I'm starting with the first one because it's the one that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. This was a long time ago, back before every place had cameras on every corner and alarms tied into a security company. I'm not saying security didn't exist. It just wasn't treated like a priority at a little rundown convenience store off a dark stretch of road. The owner was cheap, and he proved it every chance he got. Honestly, the hardest part of that job wasn't the customers. It was him. The guy had the attention span of a goldfish. We'd have the same arguments 2 or 3 times a week, and it was like he'd forget we'd already had them the moment he walked away. I learned pretty fast not to take it personally. Most nights, though, it was easy. I worked alone from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m., and we barely saw any traffic. Hours would crawl by in this weird, hazy way, where everything after midnight felt like the same long moment stretched out. One night, pretty sure it was during the week, I was doing what I always did to stay awake. I was leaned against the counter with a magazine, half reading it and half just staring at the pages to keep my eyes from shutting. The store was so quiet it felt fake. The only sound was that faint electric hum old fluorescent lights make. After you hear it long enough, your brain stops noticing it, like it becomes part of the air. That's probably why the front door chime startled me so badly. It cut through the silence like a slap. I looked up expecting a bored trucker or someone grabbing a soda. Instead, a man walked in and immediately made the whole room feel different. He was tall, black, maybe in his 30s, with a solid build, like someone who'd played sports at some point. At first, my brain tried to file him under normal customer, just because that's what it wanted. Then I really saw him. He was covered in blood, not a little smear on his sleeve, not a nosebleed. I mean, it was everywhere, splashed across his chest, streaked on his face, along his arms. It was so much that for a couple of seconds my mind refused to accept it, like it was waiting for an explanation that made sense. Red paint maybe, something messy but harmless. Except it didn't look like paint, and deep down I knew it wasn't. What messed with me even more was his expression. His eyes looked blank. That's the only word that fits. There was no panic, no urgency, no embarrassment, nothing. He didn't move like someone who'd been hurt or like someone who'd just been in a fight. He walked in like it was any other night, like he was stopping for snacks on his way home. He almost looked bored. I froze behind the counter, and all I could do was stare. I tried to look away because I knew staring was a bad idea, but every time I forced my eyes off him, they snapped right back. It was like my brain couldn't stop checking him, like it was trying to figure out what kind of danger I was looking at. He noticed, obviously, and instead of getting annoyed or acting suspicious the way you'd expect, he smiled at me. Then, in this calm, casual tone, like he was making small talk, he told me not to worry, and said the blood wasn't his, as if that was supposed to help. If anything, it made my thoughts go louder. If it wasn't his, then whose was it? My mind went straight to the worst place. I remember thinking, he might have just killed somebody. He might kill me next. My heart was racing so hard I could feel it in my throat, but at the same time, this weird survival mode kicked in. I acted normal. I nodded like he'd said something harmless, like a comment about the weather, and I dropped my eyes back to the magazine. I wasn't really reading anymore. I was just pretending to, watching him through my peripheral vision and trying not to make it obvious. He wandered the aisles like nothing was wrong, picked up a few random items, and brought them to the counter. I was honestly surprised he didn't just take them and walk out. If he had, I don't think I would have stopped him. I rang everything up with shaky hands, keeping my eyes down. I avoided looking into his face, especially his eyes. He paid with cash, didn't add anything else, and walked back out. The door chimed again, and he was gone. For a second, I just stood there, listening. Then I heard a car start somewhere outside, the sound muffled through the glass in the empty parking lot. The moment I heard that engine, I grabbed the phone and called 911. I told the dispatcher what had happened and described the man the best I could. I admitted I didn't know exactly what had gone on, but I kept saying that something was wrong. There was no way there wasn't. The dispatcher started asking questions, trying to get details, and I was answering as fast as my mouth could keep up. And right in the middle of a sentence, the front door chime went off again. My first thought was, seriously, another customer? The timing couldn't have been worse. I remember feeling annoyed for half a heartbeat, like the universe was testing me. Then I looked up. It wasn't another customer. It was him, the same man I was actively reporting. He came back in with a completely different energy, like the calm mask had been ripped off. His face was tight with anger, and he moved fast, straight toward the counter. I hung up the phone instantly, but it didn't matter. He'd already seen enough. He must have looked through the window and caught the phone in my hand, or maybe he'd just guessed. He got right up to the counter and demanded to know if I'd called the police. I denied it immediately, way too quickly, and I could tell he didn't believe me for a second. He started cursing, telling me to keep my nose out of other people's business, accusing me of lying like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I raised my hands, palms out, trying to calm him down without making any sudden moves. I kept my voice low. I said I didn't know what he was talking about. I tried every instinctive "please don't hurt me" tactic without actually saying those words. Nothing worked. His voice got louder, and the emptiness I'd seen in his eyes earlier was gone. Now it was just rage, like he'd flipped a switch. For a moment I thought he was only going to scream at me, maybe threaten me, then leave. I was wrong. It happened so fast my brain didn't even keep up. He didn't climb over the counter like a normal person would. He launched himself. 1 second he was on the customer side. The next he was flying across the counter and hitting me full force. We went down hard behind the register area, my back slamming the floor, everything in my vision flashing and tilting. Within seconds, his hands were around my throat. I'm not exaggerating when I say I thought I was going to die. I'd never been in a real fight before that night. I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I just reacted. I kicked, clawed at his arms, tried to bite, tried to twist away. Anything to get air. My lungs were burning, and my head felt like it was filling with pressure. And all the while, that blood, his or someone else's, was getting on me. I could feel it smear across my face and shirt as we rolled around. It was slippery, warm in places, and it made everything even more disgusting and unreal somehow. In the middle of all that panic, I realized I needed something that would make him stop. I didn't have a weapon. There wasn't a button I could press that would magically summon help. So I did the only thing I could think of. I yelled that I had a gun, and that I'd use it. It was a complete lie, but I said it like I meant it, like I'd already made up my mind. Something about it got through to him. He hesitated just long enough to loosen his grip, and the instant I felt that, I sucked in air and tried to push away. He scrambled off me and bolted for the door. I stayed on the ground, half stunned, my throat aching, my whole body shaking. Through the front windows, I heard his car rip out of the lot, tires spitting gravel as he sped off into the darkness. I didn't even stand up right away. I just lay there for a minute, trying to breathe normally, covered in blood that wasn't all mine. The police showed up maybe 10 minutes later. When they saw me, they reacted fast, like the scene spoke for itself. They asked a couple questions, then took off, saying they were going to try to find him. After that, nothing. No follow-up call. No detective reaching out. No update. There wasn't anything on the news either. It was like it never happened. Like the whole thing disappeared the moment that car left the parking lot. All I knew was what I'd lived through on that floor behind the counter. And to this day, it's still the most terrifying physical experience I've ever had, because I never found out whose blood he was wearing when he walked in like it was just another stop on his way home. Story 2. A few months after that first night, I was still working at the same gas station, which is probably the dumbest decision I could have made. But I needed the money, and I also did what a lot of people do after something traumatic. I tried to shrink it down in my head. I convinced myself it was a freak, one-off thing. Wrong place, wrong time. Lightning that wouldn't strike twice. It did. The setup for the second incident was almost identical. Another late night. Another stretch of dead silence where the store felt like it existed outside of time. I was alone again, bored out of my mind, trying to stay awake and watching the hours crawl. The fluorescent lights were doing their usual buzzing thing, and the parking lot outside was empty and black, like a sheet of ink under the streetlights. Then the door chimed. A guy walked in and immediately didn't fit. The first thing I noticed wasn't his face. It was what he was wearing. A suit. Not a cheap wrinkled suit either. This one looked expensive. Dark gray. Tailored like it was made for him. It was the kind of outfit you'd expect at a wedding or some corporate event, not at a lonely gas station after midnight. Out where we were, people came in wearing hoodies, work boots, maybe a jacket with oil stains on the sleeves. Nobody showed up dressed like that. I kept waiting for the normal part, like maybe he'd laugh to himself and head down an aisle for aspirin or a bottle of water, but he didn't browse. He didn't even glance at the shelves. He walked straight to the counter like he already knew exactly what he came for. The weirdest part was that he didn't greet me. He didn't make small talk. He barely even looked at me. He reached into his suit jacket, slow and deliberate, and pulled out a photograph. For a split second, my body tightened like he was about to show a badge or a weapon. Instead, he slid the photo forward so I could see it. I looked down and my stomach dropped so hard it felt like the floor moved. It was a picture of the man from the first incident. The same guy who came in drenched in blood. The same guy who came back furious after I called 911. The same guy who jumped the counter and tried to choke the life out of me. The photo wasn't perfectly clear. Maybe it was taken from a distance or printed off something. But I knew that face. I'd seen it inches from mine. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but I'm sure I failed. I stared down at the photo, like if I looked long enough, it would turn into something else. I could feel the man in the suit watching me, not blinking, not moving, like he was measuring every reaction on my face. He didn't say anything at first. The silence stretched out in a way that made my skin prickle. When I finally looked up, he was staring straight at me. Not angry, not friendly, just focused, like he was reading me. I didn't know if he expected me to speak, so I didn't. My mouth felt dry and stupid. The whole moment was painfully awkward, and it kept getting worse the longer it lasted. Then, after what felt like way too long, he finally talked. His voice surprised me. It was rough, like gravel, like he'd been chain smoking for years. He asked if I'd ever seen the man in the photo before. Everything in my body screamed to pick the safest answer, and the safest answer was denial. So I told him no. I said I'd never seen him. It came out fast, almost automatic, and even as I said it, I could feel how desperate it sounded, but my gut was yelling at me to stay out of whatever this was. I didn't know who the suited guy really was, but I knew the question wasn't harmless. He didn't respond. He just stared at me with those cold, calculating eyes, the kind of stare that makes you second-guess your own breathing. Every second that passed made me less confident my lie was believable, but I didn't change it. I held my ground because changing my story felt like stepping into a trap. Finally, he reached out, picked the photograph back up, and turned away like he'd accepted it. The instant his back was to me, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My shoulders loosened. And for a moment, I thought it was done. I watched him walk toward the door, the suit looking almost ridiculous under the harsh store lighting. But right before he pushed the door open, he stopped. He turned around one more time and looked at me like he could see straight through my skull. Then, in a calm voice that felt more threatening than yelling, he told me he knew I was lying. And then he left. The door chimed, and he was gone like he'd never been there. I stood behind the counter, feeling rattled in a way I didn't want to admit. Being alone in that store suddenly felt like being alone in a fishbowl, too exposed, too easy to reach. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of what I'd just experienced. Who was he? How did he know about the first incident? Why was he showing me a picture of that man? I went through all the possibilities. Maybe he was a cop or a detective. Maybe he was private security. Maybe he was someone connected to whatever the blood-covered guy was involved in. That last thought was the one that really settled in my chest and stayed there. And the more I thought about it, the more I told myself that if he was official, he would have said so. He would have shown credentials, given a name, something. The fact that he didn't made it feel like bad news. I didn't call the police that night. Part of it was that I didn't even know what I'd report. Another part was the lingering dread from the first time I called and how fast it turned into a fight for my life. So I stayed quiet. I finished the shift tense and jumpy, expecting something else to happen, but nothing did. For a while after that, things seemed normal again. Not safe exactly, but quiet. Then a few weeks later, I started noticing a silver SUV. At first, it was parked across the street from the gas station during the day. That alone wasn't weird. People parked in random places all the time. But then I saw the same SUV at the grocery store I went to. That made me pause. A couple days after that, I saw it again in another spot. I had no reason to connect to the gas station. The moment I saw it on my street, my blood went cold. I'm not a paranoid person. I don't usually assume I'm being followed. But when the same vehicle keeps popping up in completely different parts of your life over the course of about 2 weeks, you start paying attention. I had this heavy feeling that I already knew who it was, and I told myself the next time I saw it, I'd call the police, quietly, and without making it obvious, because it had to be him, the man in the suit. The worst part wasn't even the car itself. It was the question that wouldn't leave my head. How did he figure out where I lived? I lived alone back then. I didn't have roommates. I didn't have anyone around to compare notes with, and I didn't feel protected in my own place anymore. Still, for reasons I can't defend now, I convinced myself I could ignore it until it went away. That was a mistake. About 3 weeks after that suited guy first showed up in the store, I got yanked awake in the middle of the night by the sound of glass breaking. It wasn't a small sound. It was sharp and violent, like something exploding in another room. My heart kicked hard, and my first instinct wasn't to hide. It was to move. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and ran out into the living room, adrenaline making everything feel too bright and too loud. My place was small, so it didn't take long to check it. There was nobody inside, no footsteps, no movement, no shadows slipping around corners. But something was there. In the middle of my living room floor, surrounded by broken glass, was a rock. Just a plain rock, about the size of a fist, sitting there like someone placed it carefully after throwing it through my window. There wasn't a note, nothing written, but I understood it anyway. It wasn't about robbing me. It was a message, a reminder that someone could reach me whenever they wanted. Standing there with the bat in my hands, looking at that rock and the shattered window, I realized I couldn't keep doing this. Whoever that guy was, he'd been watching me. He was involved in something ugly, and he was trying to force me into it, or scare me into silence, or punish me for what I'd done. I didn't know the exact reason, but I knew I wanted no part of any of it, so I gave in. I quit the next day. I didn't argue, didn't negotiate, didn't put in a long notice. I just got out. I started looking for a new place to live as soon as I could, checking listings, calling around, doing anything that moved me away from that area. It took a little over a month, but I found a plain apartment a few towns over. Nothing special, the kind of building nobody would remember driving past. And during that time, I didn't see that silver SUV again. Not once. But by then, my mind was made up. I moved anyway. After that, things finally went quiet. No more SUV. No more strange encounters. No more late-night jolts of panic when I heard a noise outside. I got another job without too much trouble, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I could breathe normally again. Less than a year later, I moved again, this time way out of state, and that was the end of it. But I still think about those two experiences sometimes. Even though the first one was the night I honestly thought I was going to be killed, it's the second one that sticks with me the most. I never figured out why someone would put that much effort into stalking me, messing with my head, threatening me in my own home. All because I called the cops on a man who walked into my store, drenched in blood. The only explanation I've ever been able to come up with is that he somehow believed I was connected to that first guy, that I was hiding him, helping him, sheltering him, something like that. It's been years, and I've accepted that I'll probably never know what the truth was behind any of it. Story 3. This happened about 8 months ago, and I still catch myself replaying it on long drives, especially when the road is empty and the cab is too quiet. The night it happened, I was driving home from a job site that was about 3 hours away. I was beyond tired. The work had dragged on longer than it was supposed to, and I wasn't running on nearly enough caffeine for the kind of day I'd had. By the time I finally got my truck pointed back toward home, it was already after 10 p.m. 3 hours doesn't sound like much on paper, but after a full day of exhausting work, even keeping your eyes open starts to feel like a task you have to force yourself to do. My truck is older too. No fancy lane assist, no alerts, none of that. It's just me, the dark highway, and whatever focus I can scrape together. About 45 minutes into the drive, I knew I couldn't keep pushing. My eyelids were doing that slow, heavy drift like they were closing on their own, and I kept having to shake my head hard to reset myself. The next gas station off the highway felt like a lifesaver. I pulled in around 11 o'clock, filled the tank, smoked a cigarette, and stood there next to the pump trying to decide what made the most sense. I still had over 2 hours left, and there was no way I was going to make it like this. So I decided I'd take a quick nap and finish the drive after. I drove over to the far corner of the lot, shut the engine off, and figured I'd sleep for a couple hours right there. I've slept in worse places. At the time, it didn't feel risky. It felt practical. I was out almost immediately. When my alarm went off, it felt like I'd barely closed my eyes, like I'd blinked and an hour had vanished. I wasn't completely refreshed, but I was more awake than I'd been before I stopped, and I took that as good enough. When I looked around, the parking lot was empty. I remembered at least a couple other cars being there earlier, but now it was just my truck under the lights and the dark highway beyond it. I didn't think too hard about it. I started up, pulled back onto the highway, and kept going. For the first 20 minutes or so, everything was normal. The road was dead, and I fell into that steady driving trance where your hands know what to do and your brain kind of floats behind your eyes. Not asleep, just on autopilot. That's when I noticed a sound. At first, I didn't even register it as weird. It took a minute for my brain to separate it from the normal rattles and hums of an older truck. Then it clicked. There was a faint thumping coming from somewhere behind me. I turned the AC down so I could hear better and glanced over my shoulder a couple times. Nothing obvious was bouncing around in the back seat. No loose cooler, no toolbox sliding, so I assumed it was something shifting in the truck bed. A tool maybe, something I'd left back there moving around with the vibration of the road. There wasn't much I could do about it while driving, and it didn't feel serious enough to pull over right away. I told myself I'd check it when I got home and kept going, but the sound didn't stop. It kept tapping at my nerves, steady enough to be irritating. Eventually, I turned the radio up to drown it out. It helped, but not completely. The thumping was still there under the music, like an unwanted reminder that something wasn't right. I started getting mad at it more than worried. At one point, I smacked my hand down on the dashboard and cursed, like I was scolding the truck itself. And then, strangely, it went quiet. For about 10 minutes, there was nothing. No thump, no faint bumping. I felt relief, not because I thought I'd been in danger, but because the noise was driving me insane. The irritation also woke me up a little more. The rush of anger cleared some of the fog in my head. That's when a different thought slid in and stuck. It didn't make sense for a random object to stop making noise because I got frustrated and hit the dash. And I'd already ruled out the truck itself making the sound. Because a mechanical problem doesn't just pause like it's listening to you. The timing felt too clean, too convenient. I tried to talk myself out of it, but it kept nagging at me. I was still debating whether I should pull over and check the bed when I heard a sharp, violent crack directly behind me. It wasn't a normal sound. It wasn't like something shifting or popping. It was loud and sudden, like something had slammed hard into glass. The next few seconds were pure chaos. I whipped my head around, and what I saw almost made me lose control completely. There was a person standing in the bed of my truck, and he was hammering on the glass divider between the bed and the back seat with one of my tools. It was dark, but the movement was unmistakable. His arms were rising and dropping again and again, frantic and animal-like, like he was trying to smash his way into the cab. My body reacted before my brain caught up. I swerved partly from fear and partly because some desperate part of me thought I could shake him off. The truck fishtailed. For a moment, I felt that sickening weight shift like I was about to spin out and roll. My hands were white on the wheel, my heart pounding so hard it made my vision feel tight. I genuinely thought I was going to crash, but all I could focus on was the guy behind me beating on the glass like he didn't care if we both died. Somehow, I got the truck back under control and skidded to a stop, half in the right lane and half on the shoulder. I didn't even process how lucky I was not to have wrecked. My whole body felt disoriented, like my brain was lagging behind the motion. The second everything stopped moving, I ripped my seatbelt off. I don't know why I did what I did next. I'm not some brave, fearless person. I wasn't armed, but sitting there, trapped in the cab, while someone tried to break through behind me, felt impossible. I had this surge of stupid confidence that I needed to face him, like confronting him would make it real and manageable. I threw the door open and ran around the truck. As I got near the bed, I saw him climbing out. He was wearing a hoodie. He swung a leg over, dropped to the ground, and took off toward the tree line beside the highway. Without thinking, I chased him for a few seconds. Then reality hit. It was pitch black out there. No streetlights, no houses, just trees and darkness. I had no idea if he had a weapon, and we were completely alone. Whatever boldness had pushed me forward evaporated in an instant, and fear flooded back in like cold water. I turned around and ran back to my truck. I got in, slammed the door, and sped off without even looking in the mirror to see where he went. I just needed distance. I drove for a bit, hands shaking, swallowing that tight feeling in my throat, and then I pulled over again because I had to see the damage. I couldn't keep driving without knowing what he'd done. My mind felt scrambled. I couldn't think straight. I started breathing too fast, and it turned into something that felt like a panic attack. I forced myself to slow down, to take a few shaky breaths, and then I climbed out. The glass divider was ruined. It wasn't completely gone, but it was spiderwebbed with cracks so dense that one more solid hit would have finished it. Standing there in the dark, seeing how close he'd gotten to breaking through, made me feel sick. I climbed into the bed to figure out what tool he'd been using, and that's when I noticed something that didn't belong there. A foreign object. Not one of my tools. At first, my brain didn't understand what it was. Then it clicked. It was a trash bag, folded and wrapped around itself multiple times like someone had tried to seal it up tight. It was small, maybe about the size of 2 fists. It looked damp, and it smelled horrible. Not like gasoline or exhaust, like something spoiled, like rotting food or meat that had been sitting too long. I crouched down and the smell hit harder. Thick and rancid enough to make my stomach turn. I didn't want to touch it, but I also couldn't leave it in my truck. I needed it gone. I needed it away from me. So I grabbed it as carefully as I could and threw it toward the tree line without even thinking about where it landed. Then I climbed down, got back in the driver's seat, and pulled out immediately. I didn't want to be stopped on the side of that highway any longer than I had to. As I started moving again, I looked down at my hands in the glow from the dash and realized they were faintly red. Not bright, not dripping, but tinted. The bag had been coated in something red. And now that same red was on my skin. I felt nauseous, but there was nothing I could do except keep driving. I wiped my hands on my jeans as best as I could and focused on getting home without spiraling. I ended up keeping the whole thing to myself at first. I didn't call the police. I didn't know what I'd even say. And I didn't want to deal with the questions or the disbelief. It wasn't until weeks later that I told my friends, and even then, saying it out loud made it sound unreal. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had a friend replace the glass divider a few days later, no questions asked, and I tried to move on like it was over. But it definitely did something to me. Looking back, the only explanation that makes sense is that he climbed into the bed while I was asleep at that gas station. I don't have a bed cover, so it wouldn't have been hard. The part that still chills me is that he must have been lying completely flat for most of the drive. Otherwise, I would have seen him in the mirrors or noticed movement in the lights from passing cars. That means he was back there, pressed down and silent for miles and miles, while I drove half awake through the dark. I've never been in a situation like that before, where I honestly thought I might not make it out. And even now, when I'm alone on the road at night, any little thump from the back of the truck makes my grip tighten on the steering wheel.